Drake just got caught lying on camera, and this time the receipts did not come from a diss track. They came from his own Instagram account. What you are about to hear is one of the messiest, most embarrassing slip-ups in Drake's entire career, and it involves Lefty Gunplay, Kendrick Lamar, ADAM22, Wack 100, and a podcast Drake probably wishes he never touched. Buckle in, because the West Coast just handed Drake another L, and he walked straight into it. Let me set the table for you before we get into the receipts, because if you don't understand the pieces on the board, you won't understand why this is such a huge blow to Drake's credibility. For the last year, Drake has been in one of the ugliest, most bruising public battles of his life. Kendrick Lamar dismantled him bar by bar, punchline by punchline, and the aftershocks are still rolling across every corner of the culture. And while Kendrick Lamar has been taking victory laps, Grammy stages, halftime shows, and everything in between, Drake has been quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, trying to peel West Coast artists off Kendrick Lamar's roster one by one. That is the context. That is the temperature. Now enter Lefty Gunplay. Lefty Gunplay is not just some random name floating in the algorithm. Lefty Gunplay is the young West Coast artist who showed up on stage with Kendrick Lamar, who benefited from that historic Grammy moment, who got the cosign that most artists dream about for a decade before it ever comes. Lefty Gunplay stood next to Kendrick Lamar and Mustard and Solless from OTR Records while the entire industry watched. And now a story is dropping that says Drake has been trying, on more than one occasion, to slide into Lefty Gunplay's DMs and pull him away from that camp. That's the tea. That is the accusation. And Drake, being Drake, decided to deny it. That denial is where the whole thing collapses. Here is how the fuse got lit. On the podcast Back on Fig, which is closely tied to the TD ecosystem through Smack, who is deep in that Kendrick Lamar and Schoolboy Q orbit, Solless from OTR Records sat down and told the world what really went on behind the scenes. According to Solless, Drake reached out to Lefty Gunplay's team not once, but twice. The first attempt came right after TV Off started tearing the charts apart. The second attempt came right after the Grammys, right after Lefty Gunplay's biggest moment on the biggest stage. Both times, according to Solless, the OTR camp said no. Both times, communication with Drake's team was iced out. Both times, loyalty to Kendrick Lamar came before any bag Drake could dangle. And Solless made the reasoning crystal clear. He said his team did not want to be used as a prop. He said his team has nothing but respect and gratitude for Kendrick Lamar. He said Kendrick Lamar changed their lives, put the eyes on their movement, and there is absolutely no world in which they would betray that trust for a paycheck from the opposition. That single sentence, that phrase, "We did not want to be used as a prop," that is the sentence that should scare Drake more than anything else. Because it means Lefty Gunplay's team saw through the play. They saw the setup. They saw exactly what Drake was trying to do. And they said no. Now here is where it gets sticky, because ADAM22, who has been beefing with Back on Fig for years, hears this story break on that podcast and immediately decides he is going to insert himself into it. ADAM22 texts Drake. ADAM22 asks Drake directly, "Is it true that Lefty Gunplay turned you down for a song?" And according to ADAM22, Drake fires back with a response that reeks of ego. Drake allegedly says, "Why the hell would I ever want to do a song with Lefty Gunplay in the first place?" ADAM22 then runs to a conversation with Wack 100 and starts waving those alleged text messages around like a trophy. And this right here is where the story stops being about music and starts being about damage control. Let me pause and put this into perspective because you have to see the strings being pulled. ADAM22 does not have a neutral bone in his body when it comes to this situation. ADAM22 has an active, years-long feud with Back on Fig and with FMW. ADAM22 has an issue with Lefty Gunplay too. So the second ADAM22 sees Back on Fig scoring a viral moment with a genuine scoop, ADAM22 does what ADAM22 always does. ADAM22 finds an angle to poison the well. And what better angle than getting Drake, the biggest name in the entire beef, to publicly deny the story on record? That is not journalism. That is opposition research dressed up as a text screenshot. But here's the twist that flips this whole thing on its head. Lefty Gunplay is not the type to sit quietly while a global superstar rewrites his story. Lefty Gunplay came back with the receipts. And when I say receipts, I don't mean a vague subliminal tweet. I don't mean a cryptic Instagram story with 3 emojis. I mean actual, time-stamped, screenshot-level, undeniable evidence that Drake has been watching Lefty Gunplay's every move for months. And the evidence came from Drake's own fingerprint on the app. Here is what dropped. A post from Yazer's page, which many of you already follow, resurfaced a Lefty Gunplay story. And under that story, the account that had liked Lefty Gunplay's reel, the account that had tapped that little heart button, was none other than Champagne Papi himself. That's right. Drake, the same Drake who allegedly told ADAM22 that he would never want to work with Lefty Gunplay, had been actively engaging with Lefty Gunplay's content on Instagram. Drake had Lefty Gunplay on radar. Drake was watching. Drake was studying. And Drake left the digital fingerprints to prove it. And Lefty Gunplay didn't stop there. Underneath Yazer's post, in the comment section, Lefty Gunplay dropped a line that shattered whatever plausible deniability Drake was trying to construct. Lefty Gunplay wrote, and I quote, "I got all the receipts. I have everything to prove otherwise." Let that sit with you for a second. A young West Coast artist just publicly told Drake, one of the most powerful figures in modern music, that he has documentation to disprove Drake's own words. That is not a rumor. That is not a whisper. That is a warning shot fired directly across the bow of the Champagne Papi flagship. So now the question becomes the obvious one. Why would Drake lie? Why would Drake go out of his way to deny something so specific, so verifiable, so easy to disprove with a single screenshot? And the answer, if you understand how Drake operates, is almost embarrassingly simple. Drake cannot afford another public rejection. Drake cannot afford another moment where the world sees a West Coast artist look him in the eye and say no thank you. Because every one of those moments compounds. Every one of those moments becomes another chapter in the Kendrick Lamar era of hip-hop history that Drake is currently living inside whether he likes it or not. Think about what it would mean if Drake admitted the truth. Drake would be admitting that he reached out to Lefty Gunplay after TV Off. Drake would be admitting that he reached out again after the Grammys. Drake would be admitting that he was watching Kendrick Lamar's stage, watching Lefty Gunplay's rise, and running the same play he has always run, which is to find the loose thread on the opposition's sweater and pull. And most damaging of all, Drake would be admitting that the loose thread refused to be pulled. Drake would be admitting that a young artist chose Kendrick Lamar over him. Twice. That is a headline Drake cannot survive right now. And this is why the alleged text message to ADAM22 is so telling. Because even if the message is real, even if Drake actually did type those words to ADAM22, the entire framing is defensive. The entire framing is a man who feels the walls closing in. Why the hell would I ever want to work with Lefty Gunplay is not the reaction of a superstar unbothered by a rumor. That is the reaction of a superstar who is furious that the rumor is true. Read the room. Real confidence doesn't need volume. Real confidence doesn't punch down on a rising artist. Real confidence just keeps moving. Drake did not keep moving. Drake responded. Drake escalated. Drake made a mistake. And now let's talk about ADAM22 for a second, because ADAM22 is not innocent in this equation either. ADAM22 has been playing a very specific game for a very long time, and that game is called weaponized content creation. ADAM22 identifies enemies, then finds famous people willing to talk about those enemies, then packages the conversation as news. It is a proven formula, and it prints money. But it is also a formula that treats real relationships and real reputations as disposable content fuel. ADAM22 asked Drake about Lefty Gunplay for one reason and one reason only. To damage back on Fig. To damage Lefty Gunplay. To damage anybody who has ever stood on the opposite side of ADAM22's ongoing beefs. Drake either did not see the game, or Drake saw the game and decided to play anyway. Neither option makes Drake look good. There is also a version of this story where ADAM22 is straight up lying. Let's be honest about that possibility, because it is a real one. ADAM22 has motive. ADAM22 has opportunity. ADAM22 has a track record of stretching narratives to fit whatever war he is currently fighting. It is completely possible that Drake never texted ADAM22 anything close to what was reported. It is completely possible that ADAM22 fabricated or exaggerated a private conversation to torpedo a rival podcast's exclusive. And if that is true, then Drake is caught in the crossfire of a beef that has nothing to do with him. But even in that scenario, Drake looks bad because Drake is still the guy who allegedly reached out to Lefty Gunplay twice, and the receipts on Instagram still exist regardless of what ADAM22 said. So Drake is boxed in. Every path out of this maze ends with Drake looking worse than when he entered. If Drake admits he reached out, Drake looks like he was chasing West Coast artists trying to peel them off Kendrick Lamar. If Drake denies he reached out, Drake looks like a liar because Lefty Gunplay has the receipts. If Drake stays silent, Drake looks weak because Lefty Gunplay's team already won the narrative war. There is no clean exit. There is no graceful landing. This is the box that Drake built for himself the day he decided to release Too Hard for the radio. And that is not a small detail. That is the master key to everything we are talking about right now. Too Hard for the Radio was not just a song. Too Hard for the Radio was a signal flare. Too Hard for the Radio was Drake announcing to the West Coast that he was going to keep planting flags in their territory whether they liked it or not. Drake linked with Bay Area artists. Drake tried to blur the regional lines. Drake tried to create the illusion that the West was fractured, that the beef with Kendrick Lamar had not solidified the coast against him. And the Lefty Gunplay outreach fits that same playbook exactly. Peel one off. Peel another off. Chip away at the wall until the wall stops looking like a wall. Except the wall held. That is the story. The wall held. Solless said no. Lefty Gunplay said no. OTR Records said no. And when Drake tried to gaslight the public about it, Lefty Gunplay pulled up with the screenshots. This is what a fortified West Coast looks like in 2026. This is what loyalty looks like when the loyalty is earned instead of bought. Because that's the phrase I keep coming back to. Loyalty cannot be bought. Loyalty has to be earned. Kendrick Lamar earned it. Drake tried to purchase it. And the market told Drake the price was not high enough. Let me put an even finer point on this. Kendrick Lamar didn't just give Lefty Gunplay a feature. Kendrick Lamar gave Lefty Gunplay a stage. Kendrick Lamar gave Lefty Gunplay a Grammy moment. Kendrick Lamar gave Lefty Gunplay a place in a lineage that most artists never touch. When Solless walked up to accept that award with Mustard and Lefty Gunplay standing next to him, that was not a favor. That was a bond. That was a public declaration that this team stands together. And you don't dissolve a bond like that for a Drake feature. You don't trade a moment like that for a check. Solless understood that. Lefty Gunplay understood that. And that is why the answer was no. Twice. Now here is where you have to zoom out even further, because this story is not really about a song. This story is about the shape of hip-hop right now. Drake is at his most vulnerable public moment in over a decade. Every move Drake makes is being read as either an act of desperation or an act of denial. And the moves keep piling up. Drake goes after Kendrick Lamar and loses the culture war. Drake tries to align with Bay Area artists and gets accused of astroturfing the West. Drake tries to pull Lefty Gunplay off Kendrick Lamar's team and gets iced out twice. Drake tries to deny it, and the receipts show up on Instagram. Every single move is a stumble. Every single stumble is being documented in real time. And the internet does not forget. And here is the receipt behind the receipt that most people are missing. Lefty Gunplay did not have to say anything. Lefty Gunplay could have let the story breathe. Lefty Gunplay could have let Solless carry the water on back on Fig and stayed above the fray. But Lefty Gunplay chose to speak. Lefty Gunplay chose to comment under Yazer's post. Lefty Gunplay chose to say, I have everything to prove otherwise. Why? Because Lefty Gunplay understood something crucial. Lefty Gunplay understood that in the era of instant narrative warfare, silence is treated as guilt. Lefty Gunplay understood that if Drake got to control the story, Lefty Gunplay would forever be the guy who begged Drake for a feature. And Lefty Gunplay was not about to let that lie live rent-free on the internet. So Lefty Gunplay dropped the receipts, and the timeline shifted. The comment section flipped. The reels started stitching. And suddenly Drake was the one on defense. Suddenly Drake was the one who had to explain why he was liking Lefty Gunplay's Instagram posts if he supposedly never wanted to work with Lefty Gunplay. Suddenly Drake was the one who had to explain why his team reached out to OTR Records twice if the entire idea was allegedly beneath him. There is no explanation Drake can offer that squares those two truths. There is no version of the story where Drake looks good. And the West Coast knows it. Let's also talk about the choice of messenger because that matters too. Drake did not send this alleged denial to a major magazine. Drake did not send it to a beat reporter. Drake did not go on camera to clear the air. Drake sent it to ADAM22. And Drake, whether he realizes it or not, has to know that ADAM22 was going to run straight to a podcast with those words. That is ADAM22's brand. That is what ADAM22 does. So either Drake wanted the denial in public and used ADAM22 as a vehicle, or Drake was reckless with his private communications. Either scenario is a bad look for a superstar of Drake's caliber. Either scenario tells you something about Drake's judgment in this era of his career. And here is the meta layer, because this story has a meta layer that most people are going to miss. This entire episode is a case study in how modern beefs are actually fought. Not with diss tracks. Not with radio interviews, but with screenshots, with DM likes, with podcast alliances, with text message screenshots and Instagram fingerprints. Drake used to be a master of this kind of chess. Drake used to control the internet's narrative better than any artist alive. But something has shifted. The tools that used to work for Drake are now working against Drake. The internet has learned to read Drake's playbook. And Lefty Gunplay just proved it in real time. So where does this leave everybody involved? Let's break it down cleanly, because you deserve the full accounting. Lefty Gunplay comes out of this looking like the most principled young artist in the game. Lefty Gunplay said no to Drake. Twice. Lefty Gunplay stood on loyalty to Kendrick Lamar. Lefty Gunplay backed it up with receipts when the narrative got twisted. Lefty Gunplay wins this round, unquestionably. Solless comes out of this looking like a manager who understands the long game. Solless protected his artist. Solless spoke publicly about the outreach only after refusing it twice, which is the correct chronological order. Solless wins too. Kendrick Lamar doesn't even have to say a word. Kendrick Lamar's aura did the work. The bond Kendrick Lamar built with Lefty Gunplay held under pressure from the biggest offer in the industry. Kendrick Lamar wins by default. And then there's Drake. Drake loses. Drake loses the story. Drake loses another West Coast recruitment attempt. Drake loses another round of the public perception war. Drake loses the plausible deniability that used to insulate him from moments like this. And Drake loses the ability to claim that Kendrick Lamar's team is fracturing because the receipts show that Kendrick Lamar's team is more locked in than ever. Every attempted breach only reinforces the perimeter. Every rejected offer becomes another proof point that the West Coast is united in a way it has not been in decades. Drake is not fracturing that alliance. Drake is strengthening it every time he tries to break it. And ADAM22? ADAM22 gets what ADAM22 always gets. Content. Views. Comments. Engagement. But ADAM22 also gets exposed a little bit more with every one of these stunts. The audience is not stupid. The audience knows ADAM22 is beefing with Back on Fig. The audience knows ADAM22 has issues with Lefty Gunplay. The audience knows ADAM22 has an incentive to run this exact story at this exact time. So while ADAM22 wins the clicks, ADAM22 loses a little bit of credibility. And credibility, once it starts leaking, is very hard to plug back up. Now let me put a hypothetical on the table, because I want you to think about this with me. Imagine you are Drake for a moment. Imagine you have every resource in the world. Imagine you can literally call any artist alive and get a response. Why, in that scenario, would you spend 2 separate windows of time chasing a young West Coast artist tied to Kendrick Lamar? The only answer that makes sense is the answer Solless gave. Drake wanted a prop. Drake wanted a symbol. Drake wanted to be able to point at a Kendrick Lamar affiliate and say, look, they chose me. Because if that happened, the entire narrative of the beef shifts. Suddenly, it is not the West Coast versus Drake anymore. Suddenly it is the West Coast splintering, with Drake picking up the pieces. That is the story Drake was trying to write. And Lefty Gunplay refused to be the ink. There is also something to be said about the courage it takes to say no to Drake. Not because Drake is scary, but because Drake is convenient. A Drake feature can change an artist's entire trajectory. A Drake feature can push streams, push tours, push publishing deals. A Drake feature is one of the fastest accelerants in modern music. For Lefty Gunplay to turn that down twice at this stage in his career is not a small thing. It is a statement. It is a stake in the ground. It is Lefty Gunplay telling the entire industry, I know what I'm worth, I know who I ride with, and I am not for sale. That kind of clarity from a young artist is rare. That kind of loyalty is even rarer. And this is why the internet is reacting the way it is reacting. This is why Lefty Gunplay is trending. This is why the comment sections are on fire. Because people know they just witnessed something authentic in an industry that runs on manufactured drama. Real loyalty. Real receipts. Real refusal. In a moment where everybody is chasing bags, Lefty Gunplay chose the tribe. And the tribe is going to remember. Kendrick Lamar is going to remember. The West Coast is going to remember. And every future Drake outreach attempt is going to have to answer to the ghost of this moment. So what happens next? That is the question hanging over all of this. Because Drake is not the kind of artist who lets a loss sit quietly. Drake is going to respond. Drake is going to make a song. Drake is going to send a subliminal. Drake is going to try to shift the narrative through some other channel, because that is Drake's operating system. But whatever Drake does next has to contend with the fact that Lefty Gunplay just publicly proved Drake lied. That is the anchor. That is the record. And every move Drake makes from here is going to have to work around that anchor. There is also a possibility I want to float, because it is worth considering. There is a possibility that this entire episode was a stress test by Drake's camp. A possibility that the outreach to Lefty Gunplay was designed to gauge how solid the Kendrick Lamar alliance really is. A possibility that Drake wanted to know, before making a bigger move, whether the West Coast wall was real or performative. If that is true, then Drake now has his answer. The wall is real. The wall is loyal. The wall is documented. And any future assault on that wall is going to require a completely new strategy. Because the current strategy just failed on camera. Zoom out one more time. Because the real story is not Drake versus Lefty Gunplay. The real story is what happens when a legacy superstar meets a generation of artists who grew up watching the industry chew people up and spit them out. This new generation is not naive. This new generation understands leverage. This new generation understands that a cosign from Kendrick Lamar right now is worth more, culturally, than a feature from Drake. And that is a seismic shift that a lot of people have not fully processed yet. Drake is still operating like it is 2016. Lefty Gunplay is operating like it is 2026. And the gap between those two operating systems is exactly what this whole story is exposing. So, let me leave you with the question I want you to sit with tonight. If Drake would lie about something this easy to fact-check, what else is Drake lying about? If Drake would deny a text conversation, a DM, an Instagram like, all of which leave digital fingerprints, what does that say about Drake's willingness to distort the record on things we can't verify? That is the shadow the story casts. That is the doubt that gets planted. And that doubt, more than any single denied feature, is what Drake really lost this week. Lefty Gunplay didn't just protect his own name. Lefty Gunplay didn't just protect his relationship with Kendrick Lamar. Lefty Gunplay accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, exposed a crack in Drake's public relations armor that a lot of people are going to start driving through. Every future Drake denial is now going to be met with a simple question. Where are the receipts? And that is a question Drake used to be able to ignore. He can't ignore it anymore. Lefty Gunplay changed that. Before I let you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think Drake actually said that to ADAM22? Or do you think ADAM22 fabricated a headline to hurt back on Fig? Do you think Lefty Gunplay made the right move by refusing Drake twice? Or should Lefty Gunplay have taken the bag and worried about the politics later? Drop your answer in the comments, because I read them and I want to know where the culture stands on this. This is the kind of moment we are going to be talking about for months, and I want your voice on the record. And one last thing, because I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't say it. Watch what happens with OTR Records over the next 90 days. Watch who reaches out to Lefty Gunplay next. Watch how Kendrick Lamar responds, if at all. Because the aftershocks of this story are just beginning. Drake is not going to accept this defeat quietly. ADAM22 is not going to stop stirring the pot. And Lefty Gunplay just became one of the most watched young artists in the game. Something is coming. And when it comes, you are going to want to remember exactly where you heard the setup first. If you rocked with this breakdown, tap that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell so the next update lands in your feed the moment it drops. Comment your take, share this with somebody who thinks Drake is still winning, and I will catch you on the next one. Stay solid, stay loyal, and never let anybody rewrite your story while you still have the receipts.